The room was already humming when I stood up. Outside, Manhattan was steel and glass, but inside Redwood's boardroom, the shine came from a wall of screens, charts, projections, the 210 million merger with Stratus Global Data marching across in blues. Brandon Cole was halfway through his pitch, chin up, jaw tight, the kind of posture you practice in a mirror when you've never had to earn it. "I'm going to stop you there," I said. My voice stayed steady. It had to. I've spent 12 years at Redwood Dynamics, building the encryption platform that kept our clients' lights on when markets flickered. I'm Claire Whitford, Senior Systems Architect, 35, Boston-born, Brooklyn-based, and allergic to bad math dressed up as Vision. Brandon smiled without his eyes. "You'll take questions at the end. This isn't a question." I pointed at the revenue bridge on slide 17. "You've double-counted the same throughput savings across 2 quarters. Stratus's regulatory model won't let those numbers pass. If we sign off on this, the whole thing comes apart in due diligence." Silence hit like a door slamming. A director coughed. Someone's pen stopped clicking. On the glass tabletop, my reflection looked calm. Inside, I felt the familiar prickle, the part where the woman who does the work is told to sit down and smile. Brandon's cheeks went the color of bad wine. "You're grandstanding. I'm keeping us out of court." He stepped away from the screen, a tight smile, then a laugh that didn't land. "You love playing the hero, don't you?" "Claire." I didn't look away. I love clean numbers. It happened in a heartbeat. He closed the distance, and before anyone could stand, his hand snapped across my face, a slap, loud enough to bounce off the glass and hang there. Gasps hit like a wave. One director looked at the ceiling, another clutched his tablet like a shield. My skin burned, but my spine stayed straight. I tasted copper and cold air. I didn't lift a hand. I didn't give him the scene he wanted. Security moved first, 2 men in dark suits. Brandon cleared his throat, tugged his jacket. "Effective immediately," he said. "You're done here." I smoothed my skirt, picked up my notebook, and looked at the screens one last time, the neat columns, the lies. I'd sat in this room through crashes, probes, midnight calls that bled into sunrise. Deals had died, but numbers had always told the truth. In the hallway, the carpet swallowed sound. Security walked a step behind me, silent. My cheek throbbed. Somewhere below, a horn wailed on 6th Avenue, thin as a thread pulling me forward. He thought he'd ended the conversation with a hand. He thought humiliation would shut the door. He thought a last name was a shield. He thought he silenced me. What he didn't know was that he'd just triggered the one clause that could blow up his $210 million empire. The elevator ride down felt endless, every ding echoing in my ears. But it wasn't the sting on my cheek that hurt most, it was what that slap represented. To Brandon, it was a tantrum. To me, it was every moment I'd been told my work mattered less because I was a woman. I joined Redwood straight out of MIT at 23, still buried in student loans, clutching a badge that barely worked on my first day. Back then, Redwood wasn't the glass and steel giant it is now. We were packed into 2 floors of a converted Brooklyn warehouse, servers overheating in a room that smelled like burnt plastic. No glamour, no billion-dollar valuations, just a handful of engineers betting encryption could be both secure and scalable. I lived on energy drinks and takeout, weekends bleeding into weekdays. I remember crouching under fluorescent lights at 2 a.m., praying our code wouldn't collapse under a bank's overnight stress test. It didn't. AegisNet, the encryption suite I built line by line, became Redwood's backbone. During the '08 crash and the waves of cyberattacks that followed, AegisNet was the reason Redwood survived. My fingerprints were on every line of defense, every patch that kept hospitals, banks, even Pentagon systems online. And then came Brandon. He strolled in years later, slick hair and startup war stories that were really just failures. His resume was a graveyard of wasted seed rounds and half-built apps. But his Instagram looked golden champagne flutes in Tribeca lofts, handshakes at rooftop parties. He'd never carried a pager at midnight, never sat across from a furious client in Singapore at 3 a.m. trying to salvage a contract. And yet, in boardrooms, his voice carried. I lost count of the times I spoke up only to be ignored until a man repeated me, and suddenly it was brilliant. That slap wasn't new. It was just louder, public, impossible to deny. For him, it was a tantrum. For me, it was the last straw. And as I stepped into the lobby, one thing was certain this time. I wasn't going to stay quiet long before the glass towers and boardroom theatrics. There was a night I'll never forget. It was a raw February evening in Boston, the kind where the wind off the harbor cuts through your coat no matter how tightly you wrap it. Ethan Rowland, Redwood's founder and the man who hired me right out of MIT, had invited me to dinner. Not a formal meeting, just two tired engineers sharing a meal at a small Italian place tucked along the waterfront. The restaurant smelled of garlic and baked bread. Candles flickered against brick walls, and Ethan ordered a bottle of Chianti like it was second nature. We talked shop, of course servers, patches, the madness of keeping clients happy. But then, somewhere between the pasta and dessert, he leaned back and said something that stuck with me. "Claire," he said, his voice steady but softer than usual, "I need to make sure what we've built can't ever be stolen. Not by competitors, not even by our own board." I frowned. "Not following." That's when he explained the clause. My annual performance bonus, $92,000, wasn't just a number. Buried in the contract was a provision drafted with Redwood's first legal counsel. If I were ever terminated before that payout, the intellectual property rights for AegisNet would transfer directly to me, not symbolically, legally. I remember setting down my fork, the clink against the plate too loud. "Ethan, that's extreme." He just smiled, weary but certain. "I've been in this business long enough to know storms come. You don't see them until they're on the horizon. One day this clause will protect you, and it'll protect AegisNet." At the time, I thought he was being paranoid. Redwood was steady then, run by people who respected the work. I never imagined someone like Brandon would waltz in years later, slap me in front of a boardroom, and think it was the end of my career. The truth, that moment was the trigger. His tantrum wasn't just humiliation, it was the sound of him signing Redwood's death warrant. By the next morning, the story had already started leaking. I was still nursing coffee in my Brooklyn apartment when the CNBC ticker rolled across the bottom of the screen. Instability at Redwood Dynamics leadership questions arise amid 210 Nellar's merger. It didn't take long for the numbers to reflect it. Redwood stock slid 8% overnight, a sharp dip that would have once set off fire drills across the 22nd floor. Phones rang, investors whispered, and suddenly my quiet exit wasn't so quiet at all. Inside the company, the board fractured. I still had friends who sent me texts in hushed tones. "Brandon says you embarrassed him in front of the directors. A few are buying it." To them, I was the woman who disrupted the visionary son in front of outsiders. Respectability politics dressed up as loyalty, but not everyone was fooled. Alan Price, one of the few pragmatic directors who'd been with Redwood since the early expansions, was reportedly livid. Alan had always cared less about glossy pitch decks and more about contracts holding water. He knew the Stratus merger balanced on a knife's edge, and my sudden removal didn't smell right. The irony stung. I'd carried Redwood through data breaches, cyberattacks, even a government audit that could have buried us. But now, My worth was being weighed against bruised male egos, merit never stacked as high as machismo in rooms like those. Brandon, meanwhile, doubled down. A press release hit the wires before noon. Redwood affirms merger is bulletproof. Leadership transition ensures stability. I could practically hear his smirk in the wording. Bulletproof. The arrogance of it made my skin prickle. Arrogance travels fast. Word reached Stratus's legal team within hours. To them. Deals are never bulletproof. Deals are fragile, bound by clauses and signatures, and one wrong move can unravel years of negotiations. They started asking questions, the kind no press officer can spin. Who exactly held rights to AegisNet? Who were the key personnel named in the continuity clause? Those questions mattered more than Brandon's pride, because buried deep in that contract was my name, and if Stratus connected the dots, the whole $210 million tower Brandon bragged about would start crumbling from the foundation. The security guards flanked me as we walked through Redwood's hushed hallways. My heels clicked against the polished concrete, every step echoing like a final note in a song I hadn't finished. My desk sat just beyond the glass partition, still neat coffee mug rinsed, files stacked, one small black USB resting near the monitor. I paused long enough to slip my laptop into my bag. Then I left the drive where it was, plain as day, not tucked away, not hidden, just waiting for greedy eyes. By the time we reached the lobby, I didn't have to wonder. Brandon had already swept into my office, red-faced but grinning. A friend texted me later about what they saw him holding the drive between two fingers, turning to his aide with that smug smirk. "I've got her back up," he whispered, loud enough for half the floor to hear. The arrogance would have been laughable if it weren't so predictable. Brandon always thought control meant possession. He'd never once considered that someone like me, someone who built entire security ecosystems, might know how to cover her tracks. That little drive? It was empty. Had been for years. I kept it around as a decoy, a prop I tossed into my bag during travel in case anyone ever tried to confiscate my data. The real backups every patch, every prototype of AegisNet were sealed in encrypted repositories, multi-factor protected, locked behind biometric authentication he couldn't begin to bypass. Brandon held nothing but plastic and false confidence, and that was exactly the point, because when people believe they've already won, they stop fighting. As I stepped out into the cold Manhattan air, I could almost feel the weight lift. My cheek still burned from his slap, but somewhere beneath it all was the smallest trace of satisfaction. He thought he'd strip me of power. In reality, I just handed him a hollow trophy and planted the first quiet seed of his undoing. Brooklyn was quiet when I got home, the kind of stillness that hangs over the city before the evening rush. I dropped my bag by the door and walked straight to the spare bedroom I'd turned into a home office. No family photos, no souvenirs, just a whiteboard crowded with system diagrams and two monitors that hummed when I powered them on. The dashboard blinked to life, and there it was, a block of red numbers counting down with cold precision. 47 hours, 3 minutes, 11 seconds. That was how long until my bonus should have landed, and how long until Ethan Rowland's clause transferred AegisNet's rights to me. Not symbolic, legal, enforceable. I leaned back, letting the glow wash over me. Brandon thought he'd erased me with a piece of paper and a slap. In truth, he'd set a clock ticking that no one, not even his father, could stop. I opened my secure email client, typed a message, and saved it as an automated draft subject: contractual breach notification recipients, Stratus Global Data Legal Department Body as of timestamp. Redwood Dynamics no longer holds valid licensing rights to the AegisNet encryption suite. Please review Section 14 of the merger contract. Attached licensing certificate listing Claire Whitford as sole proprietor. The email would fire off the instant the timer hit 0. No button to push, no flourish, just a quiet notice that would detonate a $210 million merger from the inside. For a moment, I thought about warning Brandon, telling him what he'd triggered, handing him a chance to undo it. But then I remembered the sting of his palm, the smug look that followed, the silence of the boardroom as men looked away. No, silence wasn't weakness. Silence was strategy. I shut the laptop, poured a glass of water, and let the ticking numbers echo in my head. I didn't need to shout or prove a point. All I had to do was wait steady, patient while gravity did the rest. The countdown on my monitor ticked into its second day. Less than 24 hours left. I was nursing cold coffee at my kitchen table when the first call came. Unknown number, DC area code. My pulse stayed steady as I answered. Ms. Whitford. This is Elise Harrington, lead counsel for Stratus Global Data. Her voice was deliberate, each word chosen like it had been proofread. We're reviewing the Redwood merger, and a question has come up regarding Section 14. Section 14, key personnel continuity. I leaned back, eyes on the red numbers crawling down the screen. You have the contract, I said evenly, read it. A pause, the faint shuffle of papers. We just need clarity, no ambiguity. I cut in. The language is explicit. Without my role in place, licensing rights for AegisNet don't stay with Redwood. You don't need my interpretation, you need your lawyers to do their job. Her exhale gave her away. That was the sound of someone realizing the floor was already tilting. Understood. Miss Whitford, thank you. The line went dead. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The seed was planted exactly where it needed to be. Not long after, my phone lit again. Redwood's headquarters number. My thumb hovered before sliding across the screen. Claire. What the hell did you do? Brandon's voice wasn't smooth anymore. It cracked like glass under pressure. I didn't do anything, I said, letting the silence stretch. You fired me. Don't play games. Stratus is spooked. They're acting like you pulled some stunt. What did you tell them? I smiled privately, where he couldn't see. I told them to read their own contract. His breathing sharpened. If this merger collapses, it's not if... Brandon, I said, calm as still water. It's when. You lit the fuse yourself. He tried to yell, but the sound broke in his throat. For the first time, volume didn't equal power. It just sounded like fear. The third call came that afternoon. Another unfamiliar number, but I recognized it instantly. Thomas Everett, CEO of Stratus Global Data, Miss Whitford, he began. Formal, but not unfriendly. I wanted to inform you directly. Effective immediately. Stratus is terminating the Redwood merger. I let the words settle. My heart stayed steady. I see, he continued. Our board reviewed Section 14 and the absence of continuity is unacceptable. But there's another matter. We've reviewed your professional record. It's clear AegisNet's success is tied to you, not Redwood. We'd like to propose an exclusive partnership with your firm, Claire Whitford, LLC. I glanced at the countdown clock, just over 20 hours left, each second hammering forward. Brandon thought he'd erased me with a slap and a termination notice. But within 48 hours, his arrogance had vaporized a $210 million deal. And in the wreckage, a door opened, one with only my name on it. By dawn the next morning, my phone was buzzing non-stop with push alerts. The headlines read like a slow-motion car crash, Redwood merger in freefall. CEO's son under fire after contract clause surfaces. By mid-morning, Bloomberg was running a live segment dissecting Section 14 like it was the Rosetta Stone of corporate collapse. Redwood stock tumbled 15% in a single day. For investors, that wasn't just a dip. It was millions evaporating by the hour. Class action murmurs began within hours. Lawyers already sharpening knives on behalf of shareholders who felt duped. The arrogance that Brandon had carried like a crown was now painted as incompetence, plastered across financial papers coast to coast. Then came the video. Someone inside leaked footage from a boardroom meeting. Brandon storming out as red-faced as the day he slapped me. Reporters caught him in the lobby, microphones shoved toward him, questions flying. Did you even read the contract? Why was Claire Whitford fired before payout? His jaw clenched, eyes darting, lips pressed in that thin line people wear when the narrative has slipped away for good. By afternoon, Charles Cole, Redwood's CEO and Brandon's father, was spotted returning from London earlier than scheduled. Cameras caught him striding through JFK with no smile, no wave, just fury etched into his face. For years, Redwood's name had been synonymous with innovation and resilience. Now, it was shorthand for nepotism gone nuclear. A once proud legacy company was burning down from the inside, and I was seated at my kitchen table with a fountain pen in hand, signing papers that mattered. The Stratus contract bore my name alone, Claire Whitford, LLC, exclusive rights, direct partnership. No board politics, no glass ceilings, no Brandon Cole. I slid the final page across to my attorney, his nod confirming what the countdown clock had already promised. My work, my product, my future, all finally mine. As I placed the pen down, the irony wasn't lost on me. Redwood was unraveling at the seams, its empire shaken to rubble. While in the same breath, I was building something sturdier. The difference between arrogance and preparation had never looked so stark. The email came through just after midnight. The subject line, simple, transfer complete. I opened the attached PDF and there it was, black and white, stamped and sealed, intellectual property rights holder, Claire Whitford. My name. No Redwood, no Brandon. No board signatures hovering above me, just mine. I saved the certificate into my secure archive, double encrypted, and leaned back in my chair. The countdown clock on my monitor had vanished, replaced by a quiet confirmation. No fireworks, no fanfare, just the silent weight of a promise Ethan Rowland had made a decade ago, finally locking into place. I didn't post it. I didn't call a journalist or leak a screenshot. Instead, I drafted a single-line email to my attorney, confirmed. It's done. His reply arrived 2 minutes later. Congratulations. They can't touch it now. I stared at that line longer than I expected. Not because I needed reassurance it was already mine, but because the words felt like a final period at the end of a long, exhausting sentence. Brandon thought a slap would silence me, that cutting me off before payday would tighten his grip. What he never understood was that silence can work both ways. My silence had been strategy, a blade sheathed until the exact moment it needed to cut. His silence, the laziness of not reading contracts, the arrogance of assuming last names outrank merit that silence destroyed him. I closed my laptop and touched my cheek, remembering the sting that had echoed across the boardroom. The pain had lasted seconds. The humiliation, minutes. But watching $210 million collapse under the weight of his own ego, that felt like justice. If you've ever worked in corporate America, you know the quiet battles. The times you make a point in a meeting and it dies in the air until a man repeats it 5 minutes later and suddenly it's brilliant. The way titles and last names carry more weight than merit. I lived that for years. The slap in the boardroom wasn't just about Brandon's temper, it was about every eye roll, every dismissal, every door closed when I'd already earned my seat at the table. What saved me wasn't shouting louder or trying to out-ego the men who thrived on spectacle. It was patience, preparation, knowing my work would speak louder than their noise when the moment came. Arrogance can close deals in the short term, but it can't carry them to the finish line. Nepotism can buy you a corner office, but it can't teach you to build something that lasts. I didn't fight Brandon in the boardroom. I didn't throw a drink in his face or beg the board to see my value. I didn't have to. The contracts, the code, the quiet years of showing up at 2 a.m. When servers crashed, those were already loaded like ammunition. All I had to do was wait for the fuse he lit himself to burn down. And when it did, the empire crumbled not because I raised my voice, but because the truth finally did. So I'll ask you this. Have you ever been told your voice didn't matter? Have you ever been erased by someone who thought their last name was more powerful than your work? Let them laugh. Let them slap. Just be ready when the contract speaks louder than they ever could.